You say you want discipline. You want to wake up earlier. You want to work harder. You want to become the kind of person who actually follows through. But there is a quiet sentence running in the background of your mind, a sentence you rarely question. I'm just not that kind of person. Not a morning person, not a disciplined person, not someone who sticks to routines, not someone who finishes what they start. And the moment you say that, you stop trying. Because identity is powerful, much more powerful than motivation. Motivation pushes, identity permits. You don't act based on what you want, you act based on who you believe you are. If you believe you're someone who struggles with discipline, every failed attempt becomes proof. You wake up late once. See, I knew it. I'm not a morning person. You skip the gym. Yeah, fitness just isn't really my thing. You procrastinate. I've always been bad with focus. And with every repetition, the identity gets stronger. Not because it's true, but because it's repeated. You think your habits shape your identity, but often your identity shapes your habits first. A person who sees themselves as unorganized will subconsciously protect that label, because changing behavior means confronting the possibility that the story you've been telling about yourself is wrong. And people protect their stories fiercely, even when the story is hurting them. This is the identity trap. You don't fail because discipline is impossible. You fail because your identity has already decided the outcome. Imagine two people facing the exact same task. Both are tired, both are busy, both would rather relax. One says, I'm the type of person who finishes what they start. The other says, I'm terrible at sticking to things. Guess who keeps going? It's not about willpower, it's about narrative. The story you tell yourself determines what behaviors feel natural and which ones feel impossible. When your identity says something isn't you, your brain resists it. You can force the behavior for a few days, maybe a week, but eventually you return to the identity you believe, because acting out of alignment with your identity feels exhausting. This is why so many people fail at self-improvement. They try to change actions without changing identity. They download productivity apps, they buy planners, they watch motivational videos, but deep down they still believe, I'm just not disciplined. So the moment things get difficult, they retreat, not because the task is too hard, but because their identity pulls them back. Your identity acts like a thermostat. You might temporarily raise the temperature, but eventually the system resets to the level it believes is normal. If your identity says you're inconsistent, you will return to inconsistency. If your identity says you're lazy, you will unconsciously protect laziness, even if you hate it. And here is the dangerous part. Most identities were never consciously chosen. They were inherited. From childhood, from teachers, from parents, from early failures. Maybe someone told you when you were young that you lacked discipline. Maybe you struggled with school once. Maybe you quit something early. And slowly a label formed. Not disciplined, not focused, not strong. And once the label stuck, you started acting accordingly. Not because it was accurate, but because it was familiar. Familiar identities feel safe, even when they're limiting. Look at history.
Many of the people we now admire had identities that were challenged repeatedly. Lincoln lost elections before he led a nation. Churchill was dismissed before he became a wartime leader. Edison failed experiments thousands of times before creating something revolutionary. If they had accepted the identity of failure after their early setbacks, their stories would have ended there. But they refused the label. They did something most people never do. They questioned the identity itself. You rarely question yours. You treat it like a fixed trait. But identity is not fixed. It is constructed. And if it is constructed, it can be reconstructed. The problem is that rebuilding identity requires discomfort because it forces you to confront the possibility that you've been living inside a story that isn't true. Think about how often you say things like, I'm bad with money, I'm not a leader, I can't stay consistent. I always procrastinate. These aren't observations, they're declarations. And declarations shape behavior. Your brain hears them and adjusts accordingly. Why push harder if you've already decided the outcome? Why try again if you've labeled yourself incapable? This is why people sabotage their own progress. They step outside their identity temporarily, but then something strange happens. They feel uneasy, almost like they're pretending, because the behavior conflicts with the story they've been telling themselves for years. So they stop, and the old identity wins again. It's not discipline you're lacking, it's identity alignment. You are loyal to who you believe you are. The question is whether that belief is helping you or imprisoning you. Most prisons aren't built with walls, they're built with labels. I'm just not that kind of person. 5 words. That sentence has killed more potential than failure ever could. Failure can be temporary. Identity feels permanent. And people rarely fight what they believe is permanent. They surrender, quietly, gradually, until the identity becomes reality. But here's the truth. Every disciplined person you admire started as someone undisciplined. No one is born waking up at 5 a.m. No one is born consistent. No one is born mentally tough. These identities are built, one action at a time. Every time you follow through on something difficult, you cast a vote for a new identity. A single workout doesn't make you an athlete, but it moves the story slightly. A single early morning doesn't make you a disciplined person, but it challenges the old label. Identity shifts through repetition, not declarations. You don't become disciplined by saying you are. You become disciplined by acting like it long enough that the story changes. At first, it feels unnatural because the old identity resists. It whispers things like, "This isn't you. You'll quit soon. You always do." But those whispers are echoes of the past. They only stay true if you obey them. The moment you stop obeying them, the identity starts to crack. And once it cracks, everything changes. Because if the identity isn't fixed, neither is your potential. You can become the person who finishes things. You can become the person who shows up consistently. You can become the person who does the hard work even when it's inconvenient. But not if you keep repeating the sentence that traps you. I'm just not that kind of person. That sentence is not truth. It's habit, and habits can be broken. The next time you catch yourself saying it, pause. Ask yourself a different question. Not, is this who I am, but is this who I want to keep being? Because identity is not something you discover.
It's something you decide. And every action you take is a vote for the person you're becoming. So decide carefully. Because if you keep voting for the same identity, you will keep getting the same life. But there's another layer to the identity trap that most people never see. Identity doesn't just control what you do. It controls what you believe is possible for you. The moment you accept a label about yourself, your brain quietly starts filtering reality to support it. If you believe you're bad with discipline, you will notice every moment you fail. You will remember the mornings you overslept. You will remember the projects you abandoned. You will remember the times you lost focus. But you will ignore the moments that contradict the label, the days you actually follow through, the tasks you completed, the difficult things you finished despite resistance. Those moments disappear from the story because your mind prefers consistency with the identity you've chosen. Psychologists call this confirmation bias, but in everyday life, it feels like destiny. You think your identity is accurate because your experiences keep proving it. But what you don't realize is that your identity is selecting the evidence. Imagine wearing a pair of tinted glasses. Everything you see looks slightly different, not because the world changed, but because your lens did. Identity works the same way. If your identity says, "I'm not disciplined," You will see proof of that everywhere. Your brain will ignore the opposite evidence. This is why people stay trapped in the same patterns for years, not because they lack opportunities, but because they are looking through the wrong lens. And the longer the identity stays in place, the stronger it becomes. It starts influencing decisions before you even realize it. You might think you're choosing comfort over discipline because it feels easier, but often you're choosing it because it feels consistent with who you believe you are. If you see yourself as someone who quits when things get hard, quitting will feel normal. If you see yourself as someone who avoids responsibility, avoidance will feel natural. Your identity sets the boundaries of your behavior, and most people live their entire lives inside boundaries they never chose consciously. They inherited them. A bad grade in school becomes, "I'm not smart." A failed business becomes, "I'm not an entrepreneur." A difficult fitness journey becomes, "I'm just not athletic." But these labels were conclusions made at a single moment in time, moments that never deserved the power to define an entire life. Yet they do. Because once the label is accepted, behavior begins to align with it, and behavior repeated long enough becomes reality. This is how people slowly shrink their own potential, not through catastrophic failure, but through quiet acceptance of limiting identities. Every time you say, "That's just who I am," you close a door, and eventually you stop seeing doors at all. You start believing the room you're in is the entire world. But identity is not permanent. It is flexible. And history proves this again and again. Consider people who completely reinvented themselves. Athletes who were once considered average. Leaders who were once dismissed. Entrepreneurs who were once broke and unknown. Their circumstances didn't magically change first. Their identity did. They stopped asking whether they were that kind of person and started behaving like they were. Not perfectly, but consistently enough to shift the narrative. Identity doesn't change overnight. It changes through evidence. Each time you act differently than your old label predicts, the story cracks. If you believe you lack discipline, but you finish something difficult, the story cracks again. Small contradictions slowly dismantle the identity, and eventually the label loses its authority. But most people never allow that process to happen, because the first stage of identity change feels uncomfortable. When you act differently than your old story, you feel like an imposter. You feel like you're pretending. You feel like you're forcing something unnatural. This is the moment where most people stop. They think the discomfort means the new behavior isn't authentic, but the opposite is true. Discomfort means the identity is shifting. Your brain is adjusting to a new version of you, and adjustment always feels strange at first. Think about any major skill you've ever learned. Driving, public speaking, a new job. At the beginning, everything feels awkward. Your mind is overloaded. Your movements feel unnatural. But with repetition, the unfamiliar becomes automatic. Identity works the same way. At first, disciplined behavior feels forced. Then it becomes routine, and eventually it becomes who you are. The difference between disciplined people and everyone else is not personality, it's repetition. They repeated disciplined actions long enough that their identity adapted. They no longer debate whether to do the work, because the person they believe themselves to be simply does it. But reaching that point requires breaking the identity trap first. You have to stop protecting the label that's limiting you. You have to stop saying things like, "I've always been this way. I can't change. This is just my personality." Those sentences sound harmless, but they are walls. And the more you repeat them, the thicker the walls become. The truth is that personality is far more flexible than people believe. Human beings adapt constantly. You've already changed many times in your life. The way you think today is not the same as the way you thought 10 years ago. Your habits are different. Your priorities are different. Your beliefs are different. Change is already part of who you are. The only question is whether the change is intentional or accidental.
Right now, many of your habits are reinforcing an identity you don't actually want. But habits can be redesigned, and when they are, identity follows. Start with something small but consistent. Wake up at the same time every day. Finish one task before starting another. Show up for something you normally avoid. Not once, but repeatedly. Each repetition becomes evidence, and evidence reshapes belief. Eventually, the old sentence loses its grip. I'm just not that kind of person. Because now the evidence says otherwise. You have proof. Proof that you can follow through. Proof that you can change. Proof that the identity you believed for years was incomplete. And once that realization happens, something powerful shifts. Discipline stops feeling like punishment. It starts feeling like alignment. You're no longer forcing yourself to behave differently. You're simply acting like the person you've become. And that's when discipline becomes sustainable, not because it's easy, but because it's consistent with who you are. The biggest obstacle in your life was never lack of discipline. It was the identity you accepted without questioning. For years, you've been living inside a story about who you are, a story built from past mistakes, old labels, and repeated assumptions. But stories can be rewritten, not with motivation, not with temporary bursts of effort, with evidence. Every disciplined action is a vote for a new identity, and every vote matters, because the person you become tomorrow will simply be the result of the votes you cast today. So choose carefully, because the moment you stop saying, "I'm just not that kind of person," is the moment the prison door finally opens. If this video challenged the way you see yourself, don't ignore it. Like the video, not for approval, but as a commitment to changing the story you tell about yourself. Comment the identity you're leaving behind starting today. Share this with someone who keeps saying they can't change, and subscribe if you want more brutally honest insights about discipline, identity, and building a stronger mind.